Today's daf, we're going to be learning at Sanhedrin daf Lamed Tet. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the very bottom of Lamed Chet Amud Bet. We start off with Rabbi Yochanan at the bottom of the daf, 2 lines from the bottom, who says, Kevadarish Rabbi Meir Bepirke, when he would teach in his yeshiva, his shiur, Havadarish Tilta Shmata, a third would be halacha, Tilta Agadata, a third would be Agadata, and Tilta Matle, and a third would be parables. A very interesting way of teaching. It's not the typical way of teaching in the yeshivas these days, but it would be maybe a way that would inspire more to continue learning. Va'amar Rabbi Yochanan, shlosh me'ot mishlosh shualim ayulo, the Rabbi Meir. He had 300 parables of wolves. Okay, of foxes. This sounds a lot like Aesop's fables. Sorry, I said wolves. Wolves are going to come up in the story in a minute. Ve'ein lanu ela shalosh, but we only know 3 of them. Okay, the rest got lost. What are the 3? You're expecting to hear good parables, but in fact, the Gemara doesn't really tell you. It just tells you 3 verses from which apparently these were part of the parables. In a minute, we'll see Rashi, and Rashi connects them and says what the parable is. If you have the Korah, they actually quote the Gaonim with a totally different story. They only have 1, though, and not 3. But anyway, we'll go through with Rashi. Avot yochlu bosel v'shinei banim tikena. So the fathers will eat the unripe grapes, and the teeth of the sons will be blunted, meaning, like we started earlier in the Masechet about the children will die for the sins of their fathers. Moznei tzedek avnei tzedek, okay, that your scales should be balanced. Tzaddik mitzara nechlatz v'yavo rasha tachtav. The tzaddik will come out of the righteous person, will be saved from tragedy, but the rasha will and the evil person will come in his place or her place. So now what did these have to do with Mishalim? What were the parables? So Rashi tells us it was a mashal about a shu'al sherimat haze'ev. Okay, we have a fox who tricks the wolf to go into the courtyard of the Jews. I'm not going to read it word for word. I'll just kind of summarize it as I go through it. Go into the courtyard of the Jews on Erev Shabbat and help them with the food, and basically told the wolf, if you go there on Erev Shabbat and help them make the food, they will reward you and they'll let you eat some of their food. Well, he goes into the courtyard of the Jews and the Jews start beating up the wolf. So he goes back to kill the fox, and the fox says, oh, well, you were hit because of your father. It's your father's sins that did this because your father once did this and basically took all the good pieces, and therefore they're punishing you. And to which the wolf says, what, I'm punished for the sins of my father? And he says, yes. And he quotes him this pasuk, Avot yochlu boser b'shinei banim taken. That's the first one. The story continues, and the fox says, but you know what? Come with me. I'll show you where we can get food. And he takes him to a well with there's 2 pails on a rope. And the fox goes all the way down to the bottom, jumps into one of the pails, goes down to the bottom of the well. And then he says, the wolf says to the fox, what's down there? So the fox says, oh, there's meat, there's cheese. Show me. See, shows him the reflection of the moon in the well, or the reflection, the moon in the well. And it looks like a big round cheese. So he says, how do I get in there? He says, oh, just go in the pail on the other side. Goes the wolf in the pail on the other side, drops to the bottom. The fox is at the top. The fox gets out, leaves him down there to die. And he says, and he basically uses the pasuk, tzaddik mitzara nechlatz v'yavo rasha tachtav, right? Me, the tzaddik, the fox, is saved, and the wolf, dropped down and went to the bottom. Okay, and lo kach ktiv, does it not say moznei tzedek moznei merma, right? That the weights are the sign of justice. So there you have it. Here it made justice that the wolf was killed on account of the fox. Okay, those were his parables. You can think about that more. We're going to move on to the next section. We have a very long daf full of agadatas. The entire daf is agadata. Until going back to that, a third. So we started with the parables, but the rest is going to be stories, or not really stories exactly, but we'll see. There's a lot of these are questions that were asked from the Kesar to Rabban Gamliel, although we'll see sometimes it's a Kesar and someone else, sometimes it's a heretic. There's actually different versions of the text. There was obviously some editing done, but instead of the Caesar, the emperor, it actually calls it the heretic. Okay, so there's different opinions about what this is. There's clearly some connection here to early Christianity polemics. You'll see about the 2 gods versus 1 god or many gods. There's all these themes that come up here. And dualism. We'll talk about some other themes like one person taking upon the sins of the others. Anyway, we're going to have a lot of interesting things here. And as usual, it's daf shiur, so we don't have enough time to go in depth, but there's a lot of in depth that one could do here. Again, not the usual in depth of the learning kind of dapim, but yes, the in depth of thinking about what's going on here. Why is this here? Why is this in this chapter? Okay, I'm not going to promise to answer all these questions, but we will talk about some ideas. Amar le Kesar le Rabban Gamliel. So the Caesar or the emperor says to Rabban Gamliel, Elohechem ganavhu. Your God is a thief. Now, what happens with all these Caesars, they happen to know our text pretty well, and we're going to see, which also, again, connects a lot with the early Christians who knew the Old Testament very well and other things. Also, they knew Rabbinic Judaism. So your God is a thief. Basically puts man to sleep, does surgery, right? Like the first anesthesiology in the Torah, does surgery on him, takes out the rib, and creates a woman from it. Amra le Barte. Now, here, interesting in the story, and you're going to see why it's particularly interesting. It's a woman, but his daughter, for whatever reason, the emperor's daughter decides, I'm going to answer this question instead of Rabban Gamliel. Shivke, leave Rabban Gamliel alone. I'll tell you the answer. And interestingly enough, we started with parables. She's going to bring a parable to answer the question. So she said, Da'ana Hadran, I will answer him back. I will answer my father. Amrale, she says to the emperor, Tnuli dukosechad, give me one of your officers, I need a bodyguard, basically. Amrale lamale, what do you need it for? He says to her. Listim ba'u aleinu alayla, last night, robbers came, v'natlumi menu kiton shel kesef v'hinichu lanu kiton shel zahav. He took a pitcher, a silver pitcher, and left us a gold pitcher. Amar la, ulavai shivo aleinu b'chol yom. The emperor says, it would be great if they come every day and they trade our silver for gold. That sounds awesome. Amar la, ulavai v'lo yafeh hayala. So she says to him, v'lo yafeh hayalo la'adam harishon, shenitalo mimena tzela achat. Was it not, okay, I'm particularly not reading the end of the sentence yet because it's going to be a bit of a shock. But she says, was it not great that Adam Rishon, God took out a rib and replaced it with Natnulo Shifcha L'Shamsho. Now, interesting, this is a woman. What does she say? Okay, maybe this is telling about the society in those days. That was a good thing that she gets. I didn't even translate it yet for those who don't understand, but he gave her, right? God gave man a maidservant to serve him. Okay, like that's what women were. Okay, so again, hard to swallow. You obviously could read this and gave him woman, right? Like Ezer Kenegdo, right? Also, you could use the Torah word, but she uses this word of, a maidservant to serve you, as if like, what could be bad about women? I'd rather serving men. Obviously, there's other good reasons to say it's great. A woman, it would be nice if we substituted instead of this word, gave her a woman as a wife, as a beautiful thing. But either which way, you get the idea. Okay, whether we get hung up on the Shifcha L'Shamsho or not, for not to get hung up on it, again, and understand it with, here you have the Caesar's daughter, the emperor's daughter, saying that that's the value of women. It obviously is indicative of how they value women in their day. Thank God we live in a different time. Amrala, hachi kamina. So basically her point is, he got something greater. So what are you complaining about? It's just like the thief. You were happy they gave us a pitcher of gold instead of our silver. Wouldn't you think that Adam Rishon would be happy? Amar Lasi says to her, well, that's not satisfactory. Hachi kaimna. This is what I really meant. Ella lishkale behedya. He should have just taken it out of him while he was awake. Okay, going back to our anesthesiology example, maybe it wouldn't have been so pleasant for Adam Rishon if he was awake. But he says, why steal it from him, right? Why not let him know you're doing it? Maybe put him to sleep, but tell him before. Okay, be open about it up front. Relay. So she says to him another parable. I tell it she does it a very creative way. Bring me some raw meat. I brings it to her. Okay, obviously the guy never really dealt with raw meat in his life. He was the emperor. He never went into the kitchen. Apikta. So she roasts it up and she takes it out, gives it to him. She says, eat from here. Amar Lami. So he says, that's disgusting. The raw meat, and then now I saw the whole process. I don't want to eat it, right? This is what we often say to kids, right? When the kids start seeing how you make that food, it's disgusting. I don't want to eat that. Amralev, Adam Rishon Nami. She says, there you have it. Adam Rishon also. You have a chaka v'hedya, have a misale. If you had taken it, right, if you had taken it and told him what you were doing, he would be disgusted by it. We don't want him to be disgusted by a woman. Next one. Amarle Kesar le Rabban Gamliel. Yadana Elohaichu Maika Aviv Vehecha Yativ. So the Caesar says, the emperor says to Rabban Gamliel, I know where your God is. I know what he does and where he sits. Eat Nagad ve'itnach. Okay, there's two different versions, whether this is the Caesar or whether it's Rabban Gamliel. Let's just say it's Rabban Gamliel. He was sighing and making these noises. Amarle, my hi. So Caesar says, what are you doing? Amarle, ben yeshli bekarchei ayam v'yeshli gaguim alav. I have a son who lives very far away and I miss him. Be'ina demechva le'niale. Can you make him? Can you go find him and bring him here, or make him appear? Amarle, bring him back. Amarle miyadana hechaniu. So the emperor says, I don't know where he is. Amarle diika ba'ara lo yadat, diika b'shamayim yadat. If you don't know where someone is on this earth, how could you possibly know where God is in the heavens? And some people have a different version to the story. Sorry. The next story has two versions to it. Amarle Kesar le Rabban Gamliel. The emperor says to Rabban Gamliel, K'tiv moneh mispar lekochavim. It says that God can count the stars. My rebute, why is that so great? Ana mitzina lemimnei kochavei. I can count the stars. I take chavushe. So Rabban Gamliel brings quinces, type of fruit, shadinu ba'arbila, puts it in a sieve, and kamahadolu, and starts spinning the sieve around. Amar lehu maninu, he says, count how many quinces are here. Amar le, ukminu, stop it, and then I'll be able to tell you. Amar le, rikianani hachi hadra. Well, the sky is always, what you see, the stars are always moving, and how could you possibly count them if they're moving? So you see, it really is a great thing that God can count. Second version of this story, some people say, hachi amar le, this is what he said. Mineli kochve, I can count the stars. Amarle, emalai, emali, kachich v'shinayach kamahabe. Tell me how many incisors and how many teeth you have. Okay, how many teeth do you have in your mouth? Shadeyade lepume starts putting his finger in his mouth, and kamanilun, counting 1, 2, 3. Amarle, diika b'pumech lo yadat, diika b'rakia yadat. You don't even know what's in your mouth, and you know what's in the heavens? Of course you don't know. Amarle kesar le Rabban Gamliel. Now the Caesar says to Rabban Gamliel, Misha bara harim lo bara ruach. The one who created mountains didn't create the wind. Okay, I told you in the beginning, we get to this about two gods, right? There's not one God, because one created the mountains, one created the wind. Okay, mountains are something physical, ruach is something spiritual. Doesn't make sense the same person created them. And he keeps pulling out verses from the Torah, from the Tanach, Shnei Amal. Ki hine yotzer harim uvarei ruach. It's a pasuk from Amos. God creates mountains and creates wind. But notice yotzer is one and borei is another. Those are two different words describing the same thing. I'm describing different things. It must mean one is yotzer and one is a borei, and there's two different ones, two different gods. Elameata gabe Adam d'chtiv vayivra vayitzav vayitzer hachanami mishbra ze lo barazeh. So Rabban Gamliel says to him, but also by man, it says, when man was created, it said vayivra, and it says vayitzer. Okay, in the creation of humans, bria is used, and livro and litzol. So what, you're going to say that the body was created by two different people? It doesn't make any sense. And if you want to say so, a person has an area in their face, which is like 1 handbreadth by 1 handbreadth, and there's 2 holes in it. We'll see in a minute which holes he's referring to. And the one you're going to say, the one who created one didn't create the other. In other words, male, I could see maybe head and feet very separate, but you're going to say on the face there's 2 different ones, and look what it says in the pasuk. Here it talks about creating the ear and creating the eye. Those are the 2 holes, the ear and the eye. And it talks about there's notea, plants the ear, and yotzer creates the eye. So what, you want to say those 2 things were created by 2 different people? Amar le'in, he says, yes, they were. To which Rabban Gamliel says, Amar le'u, b'sham mita kulam nitpaisu. What, when a person dies, what happens? First of all, we go back to the spirit and the body, right? Both the spirit of the person leaves and the body leaves. So the whole body falls apart at that point. Everything. Now, if different parts were created by different people, you would need all the gods to agree, time to kill this person. And how could you ever get all these different gods to agree every time a person dies? So it must be a proof that the body was created by one person, and it's only one person controlling at what moment someone dies. Amgosh is usually understood to be a Zoroastrian priest. So this Amgosh says to Amemar, okay, we're leaving the Kesar and Rabban Gamliel momentarily, And right, we're going to come back to the Kesar and Rabbi Tanchum, and then we're going to get back to the Kesar and Rabban Gamliel. But right now we're off on a tangent about the body and the body being kind of split in two. Mipalgach li'ilai de hormis, mipalgach litatai de ahormis. So the Amgosh says to Amemar, the upper part of your body is ruled by hormis, and the bottom part of your body is ruled by ahormis. Now, like on the beginning of a word often means the opposite, like asymmetrical, and that must be what they're kind of saying. There's hormis and there's his counterpart. Now, one is good and one is bad. So some people explain that the top part of the body, I think this is based on Tosfot, if I remember correctly, the top part, right? Here, for hormis, maybe it's not. I forget who, maybe where this is, but anyway, I'll go with this interpretation. The top part of the body is the good part of the body. That's where the brain is, right? And then the bottom part of the body is the sexual organs, which lead people astray. So you have these two separate parts of the body that are ruled by two different spirits, so to speak, right? Hormes, they say, is possibly the son of Lilith. It's an evil spirit. Anyway, that's hard to say them in our text because Hormes is in the beginning, the top part. Anyway, without getting too into that, but Amar le im kain hechishavik le Hormes lahormes la abure mayim ba'ari. But how, if they're ruled by two different people, according to what you're saying, Amemar says to the Zoroastrian priest, then how do we eat at the top from the top part of our body, and the waste comes out at the bottom part of the body into the ground? So something doesn't jive there. There's no way, if they were ruled by two different people, they would allow, especially if you're talking about waste, the waste to come down into the bottom part. No way, no how. Amar le Kesar le Rabbi Tanchum. Talechze kulam amalachad. Lehave, sorry, lehave. We should be kulam la'amachad. We should all be part of one nation. We should join together. Amar lechaye anan demahalin lo metzina mehavi kavatechu. I agree with you, but we can't be with uncircumcised people. Right? So we are circumcised, we can't be with you. Atun mahalitu avu kavatan. You theoretically could have a brit milah and be with us, but I know you're not going to want that. You're not going to all get circumcised just so you could be part of our nation. So Amrle, so basically he says, very nice idea, but not going to work. That's what Rabbi Tanchum says to the Caesar. Well, the Caesar says to him, Amrle, right, it sounds a lot like Shimon and Levi, obviously, who did this to Shechem, and they actually did agree to get circumcised, but maybe the Caesar read the Old Testament, knows that, says, I'm not doing that. Look what happened to that. So, Amrle Memar Shapircha Amarit, well, it's true. You're right. You stumped me. But but now you lost, because anyone who beats the king, they sent him to the den with the animals, with the wild animals. They sent him into the den with the animals, but a miracle happened. Rabbi Tanchum wasn't eaten. Amrle Mina, there was a heretic, or some people have the version it was a Tzduki, who says, "Hi de lo achlua mishum de lo kafinhu." The animal wasn't hungry. That's why they didn't eat this person. They didn't eat Rabbi Tanchum. Shadu le ledide va'achlua. But what they do, they wanted to see if the heretic was right, so they threw the heretic in and they ate the heretic. So it was clear then that Rabbi Tanchum had God on his side and won. Both had a retort and was saved in the end from death. Amalek Kesar the Rabban Gamliel. So again, the Caesar says to Rabban Gamliel, we're back to that. Amarita Kobe Asara Shechina Tasharia. You say for every 10 people, the Shechina, God's presence, is there. If so, Kama Shechinati, how many Shechinot do you have? Again, showing this idea there must be more than one God. You believe in monotheism, but not true. Every 10 people, you're going to have the Shechina, the presence of God. Karya Lishame, so he calls the steward of the Kesar, Machabe Ba'apakta. I guess he couldn't do this to the Caesar. So he smacks him on the back of his neck. Amarle, Amai al Shim Shababete de Kesar. And he kind of hits him and he said, how'd you let the sun into the house of the Caesar? What were you doing? Amarle, Shim Shakule Amanicha. The sun came in. I didn't bring the sun into the house. The sun is everywhere. Uma Shimsha de, so comes Rabban Gamliel and says, Uma Shimsha de Chamin Elef Alfei Ribo Shamashe de Kaime Kujabarichu. 1 second, let me just get the words here. 1 second. Get this straight. Shimsha Kule Almanachit. Uma Shimsha. Okay, the sun, which is only Elef Alfei Ribo Shamshe de Kame Kujabrichu. It's only one in 100 Elef Alfei, 1,000 of 1,000 Ribo of 10,000 Shamashim that serve before God. I guess what it's saying is the sun is just one of many, hundreds of thousands of planets. Naicha lekule alma, and yet it's in the entire world. Then Shchinta de Kushaburchu al Achakam Vakama, all the more so the presence of God al Achakam Vakama, that it's going to be all over the world. Okay, so there you have it, right? He was using, by the way, there's a little bit of a play on words here of the Shamash and the Shemesh, right? The person serving the Caesar and the sun. Okay, but basically using the sun to say if the sun can shine, one sun can shine everywhere, and it's one of hundreds of thousands of planets, then God, of course, who's only one, can shine, can be everywhere in the world, and it's not like it rests millions of different shechinot rest on every 10 people. Amar le'ahu mina leRabbi Acha. Elochechem gachanhu. Okay, is a gesture. The ka'amar le'cheskel shchavet tzidchas mali said to Yecheskel, lie on your left side. Ve'uchti v'shchavta al tzidcha yemani. And then he says to him, lie on the left side, the right side. Okay, so what's he making him crazy? Flip here, flip there. What's he doing lying on the floor at all? At the same time that he asked this question, okay, and this, by the way, is a meme. We're out of the Caesar, we're into a heretic, and a heretic is talking to Rabbi Acha. And he says, Atahu Talmida. So at the same time, a student came along and asked Rabbi Acha, Amalei my time Shviato. What is the reason for the Shnata Shemitah, for the sabbatical year? Amalei, Hashamina Lechumilta Deshavi Letrabayu. So Rabbi Acha says, I'm going to give you an answer that's good for both of you. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael, Zilu Shesh V'Shmitu Sheva. Work for 7 years. God said to the Jewish people, work for 6 years. Rest on the 7th year. What's the reason for Shemitah? So you know the land is mine. What happened? They sinned. They didn't listen to me. If the whole point of Shemitah is that the land is right, the land is mine, well then galu. So they were exiled because the land is not theirs, and they didn't respect that the land was God's. God kicked them out of the land. Now the way things usually work, melech basar v'dam, if there's a king who lives in this world, the whole country rebelled against him. If he's cruel, he kills them all. If he has rachamim, compassion, he kills half. If he really has a lot of compassion, he only makes the greatest among them suffer. Likewise, this is Kadosh Baruch Hu b'yasir et Yechezkel kedei l'marek avonoteim shel Yisrael. He made Yechezkel suffer by having him lie in the street for the amount of days that all those years that the Jewish people, it was like a day per year, that the Jewish people didn't keep the Shemitah year in order to atone for their sins. Okay, this is a little bit of a Christian-sounding idea of one person atoning for the sins of the other. Perhaps, and we'll see this in the next section, he didn't really believe this. He just thought this would answer the question to the heretic who believed in that and saying, according to your belief, this is not a problem at all. Okay, this isn't strange that Yechezkel was suffering for the sins of others. Again, it raises all sorts of questions. Amar le'ahu mina l'Rabbi Acha, Elohechem kohenhu. Your God is a kohen. Dichtiv. How do we know that God is a priest? Dichtiv yikhuli truma. It says you should give me the truma. Me is God. So who gets truma if not the kohanim? So if God is a kohen, ki kavre leMoshe b'mai tavil. After he buried Moshe, which God buried Moshe, well then, how did he purify himself? A kohen needs to be pure to be able to eat truma. V'chitema b'mayif, you say with water. V'haktiv mimada b'shalo mayim. You can measure the water of the world in his hand. So he can't fit in a mikvah as big as the world, right? All the water of the world can't have God fit inside to be tovel in the mikvah. Amarlei benura tavil. So he says, how does God tovel? To purify himself with fire. Now, dichtiv, ki yavo, as we see, God is going to come in a fire. So there you see, the fire is what brings the purity to God. Purifies him. Misalka tfiluta benura. But wait, is there such a concept of tvila in fire? Where have we heard of such concept? Now they're going to quote a pasuk, and this is what I said in the previous one. This is clearly not a true thing because they're taking the pasuk completely out of context, but it shows that he needed some sort of retort, and it was enough to get a retort even if it wasn't a perfect answer. Amalei adraba, ikar tefila benurahu. He says the main way to do tefila is with fire. Dichtiv v'chol asher lo yavo ba'esh taviru b'mayim. Anything that doesn't go in fire, put it in water, which sounds like fire is the ideal, and water is only if you can't go in fire. Now, obviously, all people can't do tefillah on fire, so therefore they go in water. Now, why is it taking this out of context? This pasuk is talking about koshering things, not toveling things. Toveling and koshering, even though people sometimes confuse them, they're two very different things. Toveling is you have things that were from Gentiles, not that were used for cooking. You have to just, it was created by a Gentile, you have to tovel it to purify it. Or something becomes impure, you have to purify it. Like God became impure, he needs purification. That's not the same as koshering a vessel. Koshering a vessel is something else. And that you should do with fire. Unless you can't do it with fire, then you use water. And that's in fact how we kosher. Here comes a different heretic, goes to Rabbi Avina and says, who is like the Jewish people? They are a one-in-a-kind nation. They're unique. My rivutai, what's so great about them? Atunami arvitu ba'adam. You're also mixed in with all the other nations, as it says, all the nations are like nothing compared to God. So you're nothings, just like the rest of us. So what makes you so special? He says, well, from within you, being Bilam, already said about us, and gave the answer to this question, turning out Amabet, ubagoyim lo yitchashav. What is bagoyim lo yitchashav? Right? You will not be counted among the other nations. So when that pasuk says the nations are nothing compared to God, the Jews aren't included in that, as Bilam took them out of the klal, the general. Now, instead of someone else bringing a contradiction, Rabbi Elazar brings a contradiction himself. Rabbi Elazar Rami, he said there's a contradiction between the following two psukim, which also seems like it's leading a bit to the two God, the dualism idea. K'tiv tov Hashem lako, uchtiv tov Hashem lakovav. God is good to everyone, but God is good to only those who love God, who search for God. Mashallah, so how could it be? Either God is good for everyone or God is good only for those people. Mashal adam sheyesh lo pardes. It's like a person who has an orchard. Kashu mashket et kulo. When he waters it all. He doesn't like give any particular attention to any one area. But kashuhu oder, when he hoes, eino oder el tovim shabem. He only spends his time hoeing those that are good shape. Okay, the good ones, and that's God. God basically does certain things, brings goodness to the world. But when it comes to protecting, perhaps that's one way that people explain it. When it comes to protection, he protects specifically either the Jewish people or the righteous among the Jewish people, however you want to interpret that, who kovav might be. Okay, that's the end of that section of all these questions of heretics and sometimes parables they brought to respond to them or other ways they answered their questions. Now we're back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah was on Daf Lamed Zayin, at the top of Lamed Zayin Amud Bet. The Mishnah reads, right? What if you're a witness and you're supposed to testify and you say, Mali malanu v'letzarazo? What do I need this for? It already says, aid or yadavim lo yagivin asavo. No, you have to testify. You can't say, I don't want to bother because, right? What do I need this for? It's a headache, and maybe the other person will be mad at me that I testified. No, it says in the Torah you have to do it. Maybe you say, I don't want to cause the death of some other person. This pasuk is going to get us off on a tangent. When wicked people die, there is happiness in the world. Okay, so now, because of this, we're going to talk about Achav. Okay, that's a pasuk in Tehillim, and by Achav, he was the king of Israel. A very bad king, was married to Jezebel. It says in the pasuk, "Vayavor harina b'machaneh." When Achav gets killed, he gets shot. When he dies, it says there was a happiness in the camp, and it says harina, the excitement. So why does it say the excitement? It should just say there was excitement in the air. Amar Rabbi Acha bar Chanina ba'avod rishaim rina ba'avod Acha ben Omri rina. The pasuk in Tehillim is relating to this, and it said the people were waiting for Achav to die. So when he finally died, the happiness that they were waiting for all this time came out. But wait, is God happy when wicked people fall? Doesn't it say? When they would go out, the warriors would go out. It's passing in Chronicles. They would say, "Thank Hashem because His grace is everywhere. His chesed is everywhere." Now, what's missing in that pasuk? Rabbi Yonatan Usually you say Hodu Lashem Kitov. Thank God because it is good. It doesn't say it is good here. That's because you're fighting a war and people are dying, right? Something unfortunately we can very much relate to. God is not happy when wicked people die. We learn this from a very famous place. Where do we learn? What do we learn from this pasuk? That the Jews, when they were in the Red Sea, going through in the splitting of the Red Sea, it says they didn't get close. They didn't get close to each other the whole night. Why ze'el zeh? Ze'el zeh sounds very familiar from Kedusha. Where's Kedusha? From Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu chapter 6. It's about the angels. So the angels would go ze'el. They would say, V'kara ze'el zeh v'yamar. They would say the one to the other. So this ze'el zeh is a reference to that. While the sea was splitting, the angels wanted to call out in song. They were so excited. Amar lem HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ma'aseh yadai tovim bayam v'atem omrim shira lefanai. The things I created with my own hands. Okay, that's because man was the only thing that wasn't created with the word of God. So it must have been created with the hands of God. Things I created are drowning in the sea, and you're saying shira, right? It's painful for God to see any creatures that he created dying, even if they're evil people. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, huenosa. So how does this answer it right? What's the problem? By the way, there's a very, very important halacha that's based on this. One of the reasons, anyway. It's not clear if that's the only reason. There's two reasons given. I'll give you one of them right now. Why we don't say a full halal all the days of Pesach other than the first day, because we don't want to say it on the last day when Shirat Hayam happened, because we're still saying Shira because also the Jews sang them, which we're going to explain in a minute. But we shouldn't say too much praise because we should be sad that the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, drowned as well. Drowned during that, and that's why they don't even do it the intermediate days, because they don't want to they don't want the seventh day to be less holy than the other days because it's a Yom Tov. So we do a half halal. It's one of the reasons given. There's another reason it has to do with the sacrifices, but we're going to leave that for right now. So now, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, okay, huenosas, God is not happy. Aval achirim misis, but he does allow us to be happy. That's why the Jews sang in Mitzrayim. And that's why we said before, Ba'avov Rishaim Rina, when Achav died, there was a lot of rejoicing. And this shows even rejoicing of our enemies who were Jews. Achav was a Jewish king. He was just a bad Jewish king. Daikanami dichtiv yasis, okay, this is a pasuk in Dvarim. Okay, what is Yasis Hashem Alechem? Lo katuv Yasus, God will be happy with you. It's Yasis, he will make you rejoice. But it won't be that God will rejoice. Shma mina. Okay, that's what we can infer from there. So this was all we brought. Aha, ba'avo rishim rina. This is connected, right? Because there was rina when he died, and that relates to that pasuk, ba'avo rishim rina, that we quoted in the Mishna. Now that we're on Achav, we're going to talk about some other things that happened at his death. V'hazonot rachatzu. It says there the prostitutes bathed, okay, or exactly not clear what it means. Bathed here, they washed. Basically, his chariot. They say it was washed in the brecha of the Shomron, in the pool in the Shomron, and then it says that the zonot rachatzu. Okay, before we get there, I just want to read the whole pasuk. It says vayishtofet harechev al brechat Shomron, vayiloko. So the chariot got washed by the pool in Shomron. Vayiloko aklavim et amo, and the dogs licked the blood of Achav. Vazonot rachatzu, and the zonot, the prostitutes, washed. Kidvar Hashem asher diber, as God said. Okay, this is a very strange pasuk, and what prostitutes were there? We're going to have two explanations. One is that zonot is not hazonot, but chezionot. Okay, it's the hey and chet switch often in extrapolating pasukim. So hazonot rachatzu amar Rabbi Elazar lemarek shtei chezionot. This was to be the fulfillment of two prophecies. Echad shel Michayahu, echad shel Eliyahu. Okay, one was Michayahu, one was Eliyahu the Navi. B'Michayahu k'tiv im shov tashuv b'shalom lo diber Hashem bi. If you come back in peace from this war, it means God didn't speak to me. And here he didn't. He was killed. B'Eliyahu k'tiv b'makom asher lakaku aklavim et dam navot, in the place where the dogs licked the blood of Navot, which we learned about recently that Achav caused the death of, or his wife really. There they will lick your blood, and that's what happened in that pasuk. So it was the fulfillment of the pasuk. Okay, lakiku. Rachatzu is like to clean. It was like a way of cleansing these, making sure these prophecies happened, like things were organized when things were clean, organizing that they happened. Rava Amar Zonot Mamash. Rava says it was real, actual prostitutes. What does that mean? Well, it wasn't really actual prostitutes, but images of prostitutes. Achav ish mitzunanaya. He was a person who couldn't get aroused. Astalo Izevel shtei tzurot zonot b'merkavto kadesh yir'eu tam b'yitzchameh. Izevel, to try to arouse him, put two figures of prostitutes on where he was, in order to basically, in his chariot, in order to arouse him. V'ish mashach bekeshet l'tumo vayakeh. Okay, now Rava didn't think it was the fulfillment of the prophecies. So he's going to learn that from a different pasuk, and we're going to have two different interpretations of that pasuk. So a person, right, there was a person who pulled did the bow and arrow, litumo. Litumo usually means he didn't intend it, vayakeh, and he hit Achav. It's like as if he didn't really intend to hit Achav. Rabbi Lazarma, the fitumo, he said, yeah, that's what it means. He was doing it. He didn't realize he was going to shoot Achav. He didn't realize it was Achav, I guess. And he shot his bow and arrow and, shot the arrow and killed Achav accidentally. Rabba Amar, litamem shnei chazionot. Litamem is to fulfill, to complete the two prophecies. Chad shel Bichayahu, chad shel Eliyahu. Okay, the two that we saw before. Okay, now we have a siman, krav zacha be'edom, k'tiv. This is for the next section. Now we're going to move to, we're already in Achav. We're going to talk about Ovadyahu. Ovadyahu was the steward of Achav's house. He was kind of appointed to be in charge of the house. And if you remember the story, Eliyahu comes out and meets Ovadyahu outside. And it says that Ovadyahu was a Yirei Hashem. He feared God. We're going to see, even fear God a lot. It says Me'od, which means a lot. K'tiv vayikra Achav al Ovadyahu asher al habayit. So it says Achav called to Ovadyahu, who was on the house. Ovadyahu haya yirei Hashem ma'od. Okay, he was a very God-fearing, very. Okay. My kamar kra, what's the pasuk telling us? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Like, why is the pasuk telling us that he was Yirei Elohim? Why do we need to know that? First of all, it's interesting because he was in Achav's house and yet he was Yirei Elohim. What's the point of the pasuk? So Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Amar Le. So Rabbi Yitzchak says that this is the way the conversation went. Achav went to Ovadyahu and said to him the following: B'Yaakov k'tiv nichashti v'racheni Hashem b'galacha. By Yaakov, it says with the Lavan story that basically Lavan's house was blessed on account of Yaakov. So you have this really bad guy, Lavan, but his house was blessed with prosperity because of Yaakov. But Yosef k'tiv v'yirech Hashem et beit hamitzri b'glal Yosef. Potiphar's house was blessed because of Yosef. So we have these two evil characters who had a house full of blessing because of Yosef and Yaakov. So he says, Beit Hu Gavra, he says, the house of this person, which he's talking about himself, Achav says to Ovadyahu, Lo have a mivrach. It's not blessed. Shem Yirei Elohim atam. Must be your fault. You must not be a God-fearing person. Yatzta bat kol v'amra. A heavenly voice came down and said, Ovadyahu yirei Hashem ma'od. It came down and said, Ovadyahu is a God-fearing person. So then why isn't there blessing in Achav's house? Avav bito shel Achav eino mezuman lebracha. Achav is so bad, worse than Lavan, worse than Potiphar. So there's no blessing, and that's really Achav's fault. And the whole point of saying Ovadyahu is that it's not Ovadyahu's fault. Amar Rabbi Abba, Gadol shenemar b'Ovadyahu yoter mima shenemar b'Avraham. Also about that line, you see that Ovadyahu is greater than Avraham. De'ilu b'Avraham lo k'tiv ma'od. It says Avraham in the Akedah story. It says because you were Yirei Elohim, and you basically didn't hold back from giving me your son. Okay, so Yirei Elohim. Interesting, we're talking about the Akedah here. We're going to get to another story of someone sacrificing their son. Perhaps there's a connection here. So by Avraham, it doesn't say Me'od. Okay? It just says you're Yirei Elohim. Ubavadyahu k'tiv Me'od. So he must have really been a Yirei Elohim, even more than Avraham. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Now this is the same Ovadyahu, according to this Gemara here. It's the same Ovadyahu that has a book of prophecy in Trasar. There's one book that's only one chapter long, and it's Ovadyahu. And his main prophecy is against Esav, the Edomites. Okay, so it says, so on what merit did he become a prophet? He was just a steward in Achav's house. He hid 100 prophets in a cave. It says when Izebel went to kill all the prophets, he took 100 of them. He put 50 in this cave, 50 in that cave. Why did he split them? Rabbi Elazar mi Yaakov lamad. He learned from Yaakov when he goes to meet Esav. Remember, he splits the camp. Right? In case Esav was going to attack one, it would still be the other one. In case Izebel found one cave, she wouldn't get to the second one. Rabbi Abahu Amar. He has a much more practical answer, Rabbi Abahu. He says it's because they couldn't fit more than 50 people in a cave. That's why. Chazon Ovadyahu. Here's Ovadyahu. This is the first pasuk in Ovadyahu. Ko'amar Hashem Elokim le'Edom. And it's prophecy for Edom. Mishna Ovadyahu le'Edom. Why was his one prophecy about the Edomites? Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yavo Ovadyahu. Hadar ben shnei rashaim v'lo lama mima'asehem. V'yinaber l'Esav HaRasha shadar ben shnei tzadikim v'lo lama mima'asehem. First answer is Ovadyahu lived among two horrible people, Achav and Izebel, the worst of the worst, and yet he was still good. So he should be the one to prophesy against Esav, who was brought up with two of the holiest people, Avram and Sarah, and didn't learn from their good actions. Amar Ephraim, Sorry, I guess it's really, yeah, I don't know why Ben Shnei Tzadikim. I thought I saw someone say it was Abraham and Sarah, but maybe it's really yeah, Yitzchak and Rivka. I don't know why I said Avram and Sarah. My mistake. It's Yitzchak and Rivka, and yet, right, didn't learn from their actions. Amar Ephraim Miksha'at Talmidosha Rabbi Meir Mishum Rabbi Meir. Okay, Ephraim Miksha'at gives a different answer. He's the student of Rabbi Meir. He says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Ovadya Gered Dumihaya. He was an Edomite convert. V'hainu da'amrei nashe. This is what people say. Minei ubei iba nezal bei narga. From within the forest comes the axe, because the handle of the axe is wood. So likewise, from within the nation comes the prophecy against it. And that's why he was an Edomite convert, was the most appropriate person to bring the bad prophecy. Vayachet Moab, okay, in this context, we're going to have another similar idea. The same idea is going to come out from a different context entirely. This is David HaMelech, who comes from the Moabites, because Ruth was a Moabite. Vayachet Moab v'yimdedem b'chevel hashkevotam arza. So he hits smites the Moabites and puts them down on the ground. Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai Hainu da Amrei Nashe Minei Ubei Iba Lezal Bei Nargad. The axe comes from the middle of the forest, right from the wood. Ki Ata Rav Dimi Amar Yerach Mitocham Asrachat. The thigh of the animal. This really means the piece of meat. When it starts to rot, first it rots on the inside and then goes to the outside. So it's the same idea that it rots from within. The bad comes from within. Here the prophecy came from within, from the Edomite convert. Now, because we mentioned Moab, and also maybe because we mentioned this pasuk about sacrifice, human sacrifice, this is Moshe Melech Moab in chapter 3 of Sefer Melachim Bet. He offers him as a sacrifice on the wall. So he sacrifices his son. And then Rabbi Shmuel, Chad Amar L'Shem Shamayim, one said he did it in the name of God. He was sacrificing his son to God. The Chad Amar L'Shem Avodah Zarah. The other one said he was worshiping it to idols, right? He was offering his son to idols. So either which way it was bad, because even in Judaism you don't offer your son, but the question was he doing it for God or was he doing it for idols? So Bishlam Alamanda Amar L'Shem Shamayim, it actually makes more sense to God. Why? Hainu Dichtiv, because it says there, Vayi Kesef Gadola Yisrael. There was a lot of, God was very angry at the Jewish people. Now, why would he be angry at the Jewish people? Because look how much Mesha wants to worship God. Now, he's doing it the wrong way, but at least he wants to worship God. And look at you guys. You're terrible. You don't even want to worship God. But if you say, Mesha, the king of Moab, sacrificed his son for idol worship, what does that have to do with the Jewish people? Why did God get angry at the Jewish people? Well, could Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, as Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Rami, he said, we have a contradiction between psukim. Ktiv umishpatei hagoyim asher svivotechem lo asitem. You didn't do like the other nations dwelling among you. Uchtiv uchemishpatei hagoyim asher svivotechem asitem. But a different pasuk says, these are two different psukim in Yechezkel. You did like the people in the nations around you. Kimetu kanim shebehem lo asitem, kimekul kalim shebehem asitem. You didn't do like the good people in their nation, but you did do like the bad people in their nation, meaning you mimicked Mesha Melech Moab, and you're offering your sons to idols as well. So it's really relating to the fact God got angry when he saw Mesha Melech Moab sacrificing his son because the Jews were following in his ways. And the Jews should have been smart enough to choose the right role models. And that pasuk, it says, pasuk from before, there was Ketzav Gadola Yisrael, and then it says, right, they went back la'aretz. Now it should say la'artzam, to their land, but it says to the land. So what do we darshan from this? Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, B'ota sha'a yerdu rish'ei hen shel Yisrael madrega tachtona. The worst of the Jews went down bottom. They hit rock bottom. It was a really bad moment in Judaism. Okay, last line. This either has to do with the ma'od that we discussed earlier. It also has to do with the fact that it's going to be said by Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, who said the very last thing that I just read. We're going back to Avishagas Shunamid, who we mentioned already in this Masechet. She was the one brought to David HaMelech to keep him warm at the end of his life. Amara, and she was Yafa ad me'od. What does it mean, ad me'od? Well, Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, adayin lo igia lechatzi yofya shel Sarah. She still didn't get to half the beauty of Sarah. Dertiv ad me'od velo me'od bichlal. It says until me'od. She wasn't completely Yafa. She was until me'od. She was not there yet. Okay, and Sarah was Yafa me'od, and therefore we learned that she didn't have half the beauty of Sarah. What the purpose of this, why we're ending the chapter with this, I leave as an open question. You can think about it over Shabbat or whenever you have time. And with that, Hadran alacha dinei mamonot. And with that, we finish the chapter. So, quick review of our daf. We basically did this section about the parables and the questions, the heretics questions or the Caesar's questions, kind of questioning all these things about Judaism that don't make sense, and the answers, right? Whether these actually took place or whether the rabbis are writing these questions to kind of get things going so that people have answers to respond to these early Christians is, also a bit of a question. And then we got off on this tangent about Achav and, kind of kings who go bad, and maybe because we were talking about leadership and all that, got into all that. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov.